There are some important things to know when you begin working with bones, and that's how they work with the objects in your scene. In this movie, we'll take a look at just some general things to be aware of so that you don't wonder what's going on later on when you're working in your scene and things working or not working out as you might expect. The items you see in front of you are a basic rectangle on the left, and I've got a rectangle basic layer. Then I've got a rectangle detailed and a businessman from the Photoshop file that we've been working with earlier. To make things easy, I'm going to create 3 separate bone layers just so we can see how these items work together. I'll come up to layers, and I'm going to choose bone, and I'm just going to duplicate this a couple times. And what I want to do is drag each one of these other layers into its own bone layer. So rectangle basic, I'll just put into layer 4, the rectangle detailed into layer 5, and then businessman into layer 6. I will create some separate connected bones for each one of these to demonstrate things to look at when you start creating your characters or importing them from other programs. On the layer 4 right here, which is the main bone layer, now what we see highlighting is the center of the layer, not the object in the layer. We've got 2 tools in our bones palette here for options. One is the select bone tools, well, there's none to select, and then one for the add bones. So I'm going to choose the add bone tool, and I'm going to start at the base of this object right here, and click and pull and release, and then click and pull again, and do that one final time. I'm going to do that on each of these layers here. So we get a really similar type of basic bone rig going on, and then show you how these things work. Come to the bottom of our businessman, click and then drag that up. Now there's lots of ways to connect the bones that are drawn with the underlying artwork. And we'll deal with some real specifics with that. There's no right or wrong way. There are ways that are best for your needs at the time, and we'll cover all those. But what I'll demonstrate right here, we're going to come back to layer 4, and I'm going to grab this bone manipulation tool right here, keyboard shortcut Z. When I do that, we see these kind of colored fields that go around it, and this is area of influence for the bones. There's times you want to work with this and times you don't. Now, I'm going to grab this top bone and move it, and we see our underlying art kind of connect to it. But it's not really bending, it's just misshaping right here and turning into these parallelograms. One of the reasons for that is, when I click on this rectangle basic and we come up to the point tool, we see that there's only 4 points, 1, 2, 3, 4. When I come over to rectangle detailed, I'll click on the interior of this, there are a bunch of points. Now the difference for that is that the program has more information to work with when you start working with bones, and it will deform more correctly with additional data. So as we create characters, we want to create items that have as few points as possible because it's easier for us to animate without that, but we need to have enough to do a good job. Let me come back to the bone layer right here, choose the manipulate bone tool, and when I go ahead and move this now, we get an object that's actually bending. And that's because the program simply has more information or more control points to make that bend with. Likewise, when we go to our character here, this is a single piece of pixel-based art. These areas of influence around it right now will allow the artwork to deform as we work with the bones right here. Now there's some really cool things you can do to avoid some of this bending, or I should say this deformation. When we come under the bones and we start working with things like flexi binding and create smooth joints for bone pairs, you can use to create some really custom smooth transitions when you're working with pixel-based art, but also with some of this other art.